Good morning, everybody. It's definitely a pleasure to be presenting Indonesia to you here this morning. I'm actually back home in Chicago at the moment, taking a short break from Indonesia and the heat and being able to enjoy 6 inches of snow on the ground and the chilly temperatures. So I'm happy to be on the same time zone as well to be able to talk with you. As Josh said, I'm the Chief Country Representative in Indonesia for Tractus Asia, where I opened up the office 4 years ago and rolled out our business development activities and looking for the ways that we can service mostly Western businesses to better consider the Indonesian marketplace, enter, and to help those in country to expand as well. Moreover, I have a background in Southeast Asia and in development work. So what I've done here at Tractus is work on kind of our economic development initiatives to better consider Southeast Asia and Greater Asia, as well as implementing more technical assistance projects. For example, we are the Asia representatives for the Peace Corps of Norway, where we build partnerships across organizations in Asia, which includes South Asia. We've worked on a report for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation on linking the Americas with Asia and helping small and medium-sized enterprises better connect across the borders. And this goes along with our vast corporate work that I'll talk a little bit about here in our presentation today when I'm describing Indonesia. So for the presentation itself, I'll be talking about Indonesia's economy and how they're becoming increasingly engaged commercially, as well as the proactive roles the government is taking to better work internationally. But jumping in, just a little bit about Tractus. We have about 20 years experience in the region with 8 offices that you can see here across Asia, where we cooperate between our offices within our respective ways and using our capabilities. And then we've worked on some
Daniel, I hate to interrupt. I just want to point out 2 things. First of all, you sold yourself short. Your greatest credential of all, I would say, is that you're half Canadian. So proud to bring that to the fore. The other thing is just that it looks like your slides may be frozen. I'm not sure if you want to just refresh your screen share and move us along in the slide deck.
Yeah, just give me one moment and I'll get it going again. Apologies for that.
Looks like we're back in action.
Back in action. Okay, so here's a bit about Tractus, and so I won't re-go over many other points, but again, we have about 60 employees across our offices, and we work across practices which include strategy and execution, economic development, as well as corporate finance, which we implement in each of our countries. And we have indeed undertaken engagements in Indonesia under each of our practices. But going into just a little bit of the high-level demographics about Indonesia is that it is indeed the largest economy in Southeast Asia, with by far and away the most people. There's over 250 million people in Indonesia, which are spread across 5 main large islands, which incorporate some 17,000 total islands, where the average age is just under 30 years old. And so that makes a very young population demographic that are becoming increasingly sophisticated and internationalized and open to new flavors and better connecting with the rest of the international world. Additionally, in 2016, the GDP was about 862 billion, and so just shy of $1 trillion. And so that makes Indonesia a G20 nation. Aside for this number, what we're seeing in Indonesia are some serious efforts to further liberalize the investment climate, improve trade relations, and to get this growth rate, which we have here at just under 5%, with a goal of attaining 7% GDP growth in the coming years. A little bit about the Canada and Indonesia's relationship over the short history is the history but goes back approximately 60 years. But Canada and Indonesia's relationship has not been substantially large or engaged besides for trade relationships and having some bilateral consultative forums, some working groups, But what's nice to see was that in 2014 that the Canadian government is taking a more active role and has implemented a trade and private sector assistance program run through the Canadian Embassy and cooperating with local partners to identify better opportunities for Canadian firms to invest in Indonesia as well as trade opportunities. And so the Canadian organizations that support trade finance and trade opportunities are definitely in operation in Indonesia and are happy to support Canadian firms in Canada. And so what we'll see in Indonesia is and what we'll go into in more detail is that there are actually a lot of similarities, and those similarities are based off of natural resources. And so Canada has done such an excellent job providing added value to your abundance of natural resources, and that's mostly what Indonesia is in desperate need of. And so both on a rational level of being that they have so many different resources of gold, copper, bauxite, timber, agricultural commodities, etc. They have not added value to many of these commodities at all. And so the government is instituting rules and regulations such as the mineral export ban that is demanding that companies process minerals in country while they're also pushing for food security and efficiency measures where they're going to need some of these added value services to enhance the business opportunities. And so what we're seeing here, provinces such as Saskatchewan and Alberta that have strong commodities processing and abundances are the most heavy traders with Indonesia at the moment. And also importantly, I think the statistics of bilateral services trade totaling approximately $375 million in 2014, and this is growing, is a testament to Canada's capabilities in this processing and working with commodities and adding value. And so here you see a number of these commodity companies working as well as finance and other extractives. And so what we're seeing here for Canada and Indonesia's trade relationship is it's been rocky, and after living in Indonesia for some 6 years, I'm a bit surprised that it hasn't been bigger than what it is now. And so it's been up and down, and it has followed some economic trends. But what we saw in the global financial crisis, which was happened in 2007, 2008, on the up and up between Canada and Indonesia. And after the crisis going into 2009, we've seen a dip as we've seen across the globe, and then starting to climb again. But it seems that the trend has not the upward trend has not continued, and has kind of plateaued for Canadian exports to Indonesia and is on a little bit of a decline, and we can go through that in the following slides in a little bit. In Indonesia, exports to Canada have been relatively flat, and so it seems that Canada has not demanded many of the products or are sourcing from other countries at the moment rather than Indonesia. And this could be due to kind of the raw material basis of Indonesia's exports, which Canada has been able to source from closer or less expensive nations. So looking a little bit more into Canada's exports to Indonesia, what I found surprising when looking at the statistics is that Canada is actually losing market share in a number of areas. And the one that was most surprising was in fertilizers. And this is because Indonesia is importing an increasing number of fertilizers to improve their agricultural sector, but Canada is losing some ground. Part of this could be from the increasing investments into the fertilizer industry, both domestic investment and foreign investment to prop up the local industry, but trade from Canada's side is on the decrease. But some of the areas where Canada has been traditionally strong and what fits with Canada's supply and Indonesia demand is in cereals and wood pulp. And so on the cereals side, Indonesia is a large importer of wheat, as they don't really grow wheat locally. And the population is increasingly consuming things such as breakfast cereals, a variety of breads, and wheat products, so diversifying a bit away from rice and corn, which are their staple grains. The wood pulp is very interesting because Indonesia does also have a strong industry and strong lumber industry, but Indonesia is importing added value wood pulp products, so chemically treated products, hardwood products, and a diversity of different wood pulps and wood products to go into their own furniture and pulp and paper industry, cartons, and things like that. On an Indonesian export side, we're seeing that Indonesia's exports to Canada are really relatively basic. So in raw commodities such as this coca here, which is growing, articles of iron and steel, which are raw to semi-processed iron and steel products, and footwear. So Indonesia does have a large footwear industry, but this is mostly contract manufacturers for large brands such as Nike and Adidas, and your usual suspects of people that are into the malls and supermarkets in Canada. So what you have, if you have Vietnam before that, they export more apparel and knits or more electric machinery. Indonesia's exports have been quite focused on raw commodities, and what's interesting with a number of these products such as coca, coffee, tea, and spices, there are actually also a net importer even though that they produce locally. And so what happens is a lot of companies will source the raw commodities from Indonesia and then re-import that processed to semi-processed good to sell at their nicer supermarkets and sell to the emerging middle class. But there are numerous opportunities to grow Canada's trade relationship with Indonesia. And some of the reasons here are their emerging middle class. And this is this is very concentrated in Java, which has a population of some 80 million people. And if you look at this little map that we have of Indonesia here, it's kind of that skinny middle one towards right on the F&B area. And so the emerging middle class is definitely increasing, where they're right around the per capita GDP mark of $3,500, where they're increasingly purchase things like vehicles, TVs, branded clothes, and various consumer goods. And then the GDP is growing up, and then the government is finally trying to improve the country's infrastructure. As you imagine, it's probably quite difficult to transport across 17,000 islands, while even the road and rail in between these heavily forested or heavily jungled islands is very difficult. But this is a priority of the government where they're looking to open up the economy domestically and reach an increasing number of consumers while improving the logistics and transportation methods in current cities. And then, as mentioned before, the large and young population are going to be increasingly demanding international goods and service for the improved livelihood. Where I see the most opportunities for Canadian firms are on the business-to-business side. So Canada's strengths in engineering and processing machinery are going to be a big bonus and heavily demanded in Indonesia. Added value activities such as exploration, processing, refining, consulting, environmental services, all of these will be utilized in both the agriculture and minerals sectors. And then healthcare and IT are both growing heavily, and that's the emerging middle class, utilizing an increasing number of technology, especially web services and mobile services, and e-commerce, and in efficiency measures. In direct investment, so this can work for both trade as well, but the resource-based industry, about food processing, agricultural products such as fertilizers, petrochemicals and downstream processing, and various energy technologies are all growing as Indonesia tries to become increasingly sophisticated in its economy. And then for the overarching industries of palm oil and downstream processing and environmental services in palm oil, improvements to pulp and paper, furniture, and of course, again, the mineral sector, which Canada, of course, has strong capabilities in, are definitely opportunities for Canadian investment into Indonesia. And what's interesting is really the more internationally business-friendly environment Indonesia is trying to take in increase foreign investment to enhance the economy. And so maybe you have heard of the World Bank's Doing Business report, but Indonesia is usually considered a challenging place to do business, and it is. But from last year, it improved 15 slots. So going from the 109th ranked country for ease of doing business, we've moved up to 90s. So we're around 91, 92 for ease of doing business, and the government is looking to increase the ability to do business in country. And so some areas that are improving is their enforcement of contracts, both for locals and for foreign companies operating in country, which is of course very important to Canadian firms, as contracts we North Americans typically find as testament that are supposed to be followed very clearly and to the point. So they're making improvements there. The ability to pay tax in a legal mechanism that's less prone to corruption is improving, while getting a business license, which used to take over a month, is shortening. And so the Indonesian Investment Coordinating Board, which is otherwise known as BKPM in country, is operating as a one-stop shop. So no matter what the industry, BKPM will help coordinate with foreign investors and the Indonesian ministries to get the necessary licenses completed so you can start your business up and running. What else is good for political stability is that the new administration that is more business friendly is solidified. They in their first year working in Indonesia, it was questionable where they had some in-party fighting and challenges with other political parties. But this administration is increasingly strong and determined to open up the economy and go for improvements and connect to the global business world. And then I'm just going to go through a number of spotlight sectors, with these spotlight sectors focused on some of Canada's primary strong industries as well. And the first one that we're going to go into is the cereals and fertilizers industry, which we spoke about a bit before, where fertilizers are decreasing, but the export of cereals, which is concentrated in wheat, is still growing and very much demanded. And so this is an area that Canadian companies can definitely expand, where these two commodities combined are far and away Canada's largest exports to Indonesia. And so wheat products, there was exports of about $544 million worth of cereals and $425 million worth of fertilizers, where Indonesia is the second largest importing country of wheat and flour. And so this is a strong opportunity for the wheat exporters, and will continue to grow. And then this will continue to grow in demand with more bread and international products being consumed in country. And here we have a diversity of fertilizers that are demanded, where Canadian firms can consider their capabilities with what's being used in Indonesia. The interesting thing with commodities and more on the mineral side of commodities in Indonesia is that it's quite difficult to invest actually in a mine. But for Canadian companies, where a majority of the opportunities are in this downstream processing and utilizing how Canadian companies have been incredibly efficient and excelled in areas such as being environmentally friendly, the engineering services, and really all the added value that goes into commodities processing. And so what you've done in your lumber mills and with the Canadian mines, all of these services will be demanded in country in Indonesia. And so this will be a great opportunity. And being that there's so many different types of commodities, it's hard to go into any one of them specifically, but if you did have questions at a later time, you can feel free to email me, where I'd be happy to look into a commodity that's of most interest to you, to find out a little bit more what some of those opportunities have been. And then we've worked with a couple of companies within commodities, a German mineral processing company that focused in kaolin and a couple of other industrial minerals, and so we help them to identify potential customers in Indonesia and looking at the demand basis. And so we've also worked with a Canadian Agricultural Association to look at the size of a specific market, look for distributors that could supply Canadian products, and really how to engage the Indonesian market. And then pulp and paper is a top industry for Indonesian growth, where they're courting both foreign direct investment as well as growing domestically, where you may have heard of a company called Sinar Mas, which is a large Indonesian pulp and paper and palm oil company that has invested in a paper mill in Canada, actually. And so this is going to show that there are cross-border opportunities both for Indonesia and Canadian companies for both trade and investment. And so utilizing the added value that Canada has made in chemical wood products, chemical wood pulp, in creating numerous products based on your hardwoods and your strong lumber industry is growing and highly demanded in Indonesia. And so Indonesia is trying to be more sophisticated in its cartons, types of paper supplied, the logistics, and again, things like environmental services and using sustainable forestry measures to be able to maintain their industry and work within an environmentally friendly manner, which is increasingly important for the international marketplace. And then finally, energy and renewable resources are heavily demanded in Indonesia, and this is again where Canada has done such a good job in hydroelectricity, oil and gas exploration, as well as the other renewable sectors. So Indonesia has an emerging micro-hydro industry where Canadian technologies in turbines and engineering could be utilized. Although Indonesian biomass and biogas is concentrated on palm oil, there are some similarities within the technology used for biomass, biogas, and then solar is growing as well. But on the typical extractives, where most of Indonesia's energy is going to be coming from coal, clean coal initiatives and technologies to utilize coal or to be able to use Canadian technologies in the coal industry, as well as your oil and gas, refining and processing technologies will be utilized. And so Indonesia has a number of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so considering Canadian companies and how they can better consider the archipelago is that, you know, Indonesia is a very large population with a younger demographic, which is increasingly politically stable. And although it is a Muslim country, it is arguably the most secular and lenient Islamic country to be able to engage. Again, I've been there for 6 years, and it's been a very interesting and rewarding experience learning about Islam from within and interacting with all these incredibly friendly Indonesians. And then as I spoke about earlier, the opportunities are really in the downstream commodities processing. And if you have either clients or you yourself work on specialty products and specialty food exports such as poutine. I can actually get poutine in Indonesia. These will be more demanded. But you do need to be aware of some of the challenges such as corruption, doing your due diligence on the appropriate partners, finding the right pricing mechanism, and so on. And so overall, to wrap up this presentation, you know, it's really important to be patient, to develop a strategy that's involved in cooperation and working together with local partners and putting things in an Indonesian context, even though you typically have your Western mindset. Conducting your due diligence on both the government and your local partners, and really developing a 360-degree strategy to work in country. And so although it's not the easiest place to do business in, taking a medium to long-term strategy and understanding that you need to be a little bit patient and that it's not all going to come together maybe in the first 6 months, but if you stick it out and you're proactive and aggressive, then in the long run, there are incredible opportunities in this emerging economy. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Daniel. Certainly appreciate you sharing that with us this morning. Again, just as a reminder to those on the call, we are taking questions in writing. There is a questions panel in the GoToWebinar app where you can submit your questions, and we'll do our best to respond to those. Daniel, if people do want to get in touch with you individually, is there a contact information slide in your deck here? Great, thank you. Maybe I can start us off, Maybe I can start us off, Daniel, with a question from the audience here, which is from someone who would like to understand what's driving some of Indonesia's macroeconomic growth, what's driving GDP growth in particular. The question specifically is, you mentioned that GDP growth is forecasted to be at something like 7% next year. This individual reports that it's almost a doubling of what GDP growth was in 2016. That doesn't sound quite right to me, but maybe I'm wrong. Could you help provide some clarity around the issue, Dan?
So Indonesia's growth next year will not be 7%, unfortunately. We would love it to be, and it'd be very exciting if they did achieve that, but that's their goal by the end of the Jokowi administration, which is, I believe, in another 3 years. So we have a couple more years until we achieve the 7% growth, but Indonesia is very excited to hopefully surpass 5% growth by next year, and this is based on a number of government policies as well as improvements that they're making locally. So the investments that they're making into infrastructure is going to continue to open up the domestic economy. Indonesia is becoming increasingly business friendly in attracting foreign direct investments, and then they are starting to add value to their commodities and engage on a wider global basis. And so Indonesia had very strong growth based off of Chinese commodity demands, and while this has declined and decreased, the country's added value in putting these investments into their commodities are expecting to build that growth.
Thanks, Dan. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of a sneeze here. Appreciate that feedback. Another question from the audience pertains to setting up and establishing a business in the Indonesian market. Are there local ownership requirements that Canadian firms should be aware of? And if they're not, what are some of the pros and cons of having a local partner?
Yep, and this would really depend on the industry that you're engaging in. And so Indonesia does maintain a negative investment list, which limits the levels of foreign ownership in a number of industries and products. So things like manufacturing, companies can have 100% foreign ownership, although it's expected that there's a divestment of 5% within the relatively near future. And that could range between 7 to 10 years depending on the type of investment and the agreements that you make with the Indonesian government and the types of incentives that you get. But there are other, tofu processing is an industry that's totally not allowed for foreign investment. And so there's a wide range of industries that you would need to consider. But then there's a couple types of business entities that you can use. There's they call a PMA in country, which is a foreign investment company. So this is any company that has any foreign capital invested into it and operating it into Indonesia. And this is your limited, like a Canadian limited liability company. The challenge with a PMA, it takes a little bit longer to establish, and it has about a $1 million capital requirement where about 250,000 or 25% of that capital requirement must be in paid-up capital, which that basically Indonesia demands that 250,000 be in an Indonesian bank account and notarized, but then that cash is able to be utilized. So you could loan it out again, or you could use that as working capital, or use for your investments to move your business forward in Indonesia. Joint ventures are typically a better way to quickly engage the market if you're able to find a local partner that you can trust and that you can.
Or a distributorship, perhaps.
Or distributorship. It just depends on whether you're looking to just sell to Indonesia or if you're looking to invest and grow with the country itself. And then there's also a representative office that you can use, and that's pretty easy to establish. It's pretty short, and that's able for you to come out and get someone in to help better consider the market, help build networks, build an understanding of the regulatory environment, and figure out what you can do for your next steps.
At the risk of sounding like a shill, Dan, do you want to just share with us a little bit of the type of work that you do with through the business incubator in Jakarta?
Yeah, so what we've done with our business incubator is really trying to help small and medium-sized enterprises better consider the Indonesian market. And so what we'll typically do is we'll hire a local employee underneath our business entity to represent the foreign company's business interests in Indonesia. And so what we'll do is we'll cooperate with, say, the Canadian company to liaise with the employee we hire underneath our Tractus Indonesia company to build a business plan, a market entry strategy, a networking outreach strategy, market research, regulatory analysis. We help build this plan, manage, and monitor that employee to be able to achieve your goals and to be able to build out your strategy for Indonesia.
Right, right. Dan, I know that there's a large cohort of Canadian economic development agencies on the line, some of whom are clients. There may be some on the call that are familiar with the trade and investment promotion work that we do. Do you see Indonesia as being an attractive market for trade export promotion? And do you think that Indonesian companies are large enough and globally thinking enough to be attractive candidates for investment attraction exercises, or is Indonesia really not at that sort of state of development yet? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I was very happy to go to the Canada-ASEAN Business Council event that was held in Jakarta a couple of months ago, and to see the excitement and the bullishness of Canadian companies and Canadian economic development agencies for Indonesia. I think Canada is finally noticing that Indonesia is more than just Bali, and with their commodities, the number and abundance of commodities in country, I think Canada is starting to realize the similarities between the value Canada has added over the years and the demand that is going to be increasing in Indonesia. And so I got a very bullish feeling for Canada in Indonesia, and going up with the TPSA, which is this trade and investment promotion strategies run by the Canadian Embassy in Indonesia, and looking to identify these investment opportunities to facilitate investments into specific areas. And so I understand that Canadian firms are typically risk averse, and Indonesia does indeed have a number of risks, but again, taking a proactive and patient, maybe a slow growth strategy to the country is most appropriate. And so there definitely are similarities but between the economies and capabilities with incredible potential.
Thanks, Dan. Maybe I'll just take a couple more questions. There's a few coming in here. There's one I want to ask of you that's come in from my colleague and our associate director of the Canada-ASEAN Business Council in Calgary, Andrew Doherty. His question is about the recent appointment of Ambassador Marie-Louise Hanan as Canada's dedicated ambassador to ASEAN. I know that you were at the CABC forum in Jakarta in September this year with me. I'm curious to know from your perspective on the ground if you have, in the time that Ambassador Hanan has been on the ground, have you noticed more visibility around Canadian businesses, Canadian bilateral relationships? Have you seen the profile of Canada raised, and what more do you think needs to be done, if anything?
To be honest, we have not seen a significant improvement in Canada-Indonesian relations or more of the Canadian flag being waved. I mean, what really needs to happen is for more money to come in. And the other challenge that we're facing is kind of that global pullback from internationalism. With the challenges with the Trump administration coming in and being not favorable to TPP, as well as the challenges that the European Union are having itself, are taking a little bit away from the fire of and the urgency of the ASEAN economic community. And so, while it's great to have an ambassador looking at the region as a whole, I think for the time being, relationships are going to be quite bilateral in looking at specific opportunities where there's some synergy. And so having that ASEAN ambassador is indeed going to expand your relationship, but that's going to be spread across 10 countries that are looking at specific opportunities. So in Indonesia itself, which accounts for 40% of both ASEAN's population and economy, a lot of it is going to be based on your bilateral relationships.
Dan, you brought up President-elect Donald Trump. Our own Canadian Trade Minister, Minister Chrystia Freeland, has made some comments in the press recently about some of the protectionist policies or rhetoric coming out of the U.S. actually being an opportunity for Canada in terms of going out to the world and communicating on the fact that we are an open trading nation and open to foreign investment. How do you see the impact of the recent U.S. election impacting Canada's position in Indonesia specifically?
In Indonesia specific, when we went back through our trade statistics and we saw that a number of Canadian exports were losing competitiveness, and Canadian firms are relatively underrepresented in Indonesia, I think this is a great opportunity, especially with your leader right now at Trudeau, who is very open to ethnic diversity and different people. This is something that Indonesia, where their mantra is unity and diversity, and they're, of course, they're the largest Muslim population country on earth, and they are quite, while they're secular, they are very devout. And so this is an opportunity for Canadian firms to start chipping away at the Americans that are typically more represented in Indonesia. And so coming in with a corporate social responsibility plan, being open for cooperation, having educational activities, being accepting of different types of people, highlighting your, Canada's acceptance of other people and opportunities that, Indonesians could potentially go live and work in Canada itself are really opportunities of where Canadians can use the overly, or the typically more friendly nature and openness in comparison to the Americans, which really does fit well with the Indonesian mindset and being friendly and helpful. Which is pretty much the opposite of President-elect Trump.
There's a question here about the availability of the presentations after the session. We've got that question a number of times over the last few nights. Let me assure folks that we are looking for a way to make some of this content available, either online or on request. I will be following up with anyone who registered for any of the programs next week, and we'll work to make that material available. Dan, maybe one last closing question, which is an open-ended one. Is there anything that we haven't, as a group, asked you tonight that you think we should ask, or anything else that you'd like to share with us?
You know, really, with Indonesia being such a large economy and really just starting to emerge in the West as a place to do business with, you know, the opportunities are going to be industry or commodity specific. So what I think would be most useful if you are interested in considering the Indonesian market, you have my contact information here. So if you have specific questions on an industry, a product, commodity, I'd be happy to consider your question and reply to the best of my abilities as quickly as possible. Very in-depth and intense questions of course, take a little bit more time to do some research and analysis to get the quote-unquote right answer back. But I'm happy to cover whatever I can on a high-level basis and get you the information you need to understand Indonesia and where your opportunity may lie.
Great, thanks, Dan. Let me wrap up just by saying a quick thank you. I think I failed to do so at the onset of the presentation. Big thank you to the Canadian mission to ASEAN, some of the diplomats of which I believe are on the call. Big thank you to our Trade Commission services across the region, to the ICCC, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, and across the region, and of course to some of the provincial economic development organizations, Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, and others who I may have missed, who have been absolutely fabulous and extremely helpful in terms of helping us get the word out for this week's program, and in particular to the Canada-ASEAN Business Council, which has been a big supporter of the initiative. So with that, I would say thank you very much for joining the call. We appreciate your time and attention. We'll be presenting on Myanmar tomorrow, which is a country that is extremely exciting and interesting to me, as well as a number of Canadian companies, and I'll be presenting personally on Singapore on Friday and wrapping up the week. So thank you very much for attending, and please do be in touch if you have any follow-up questions or anything we can do to help. Thanks very much. Good night. Goodbye.